And now we have Thomas Estrella. And Thomas, like I said earlier, he was actually our first recipient. He received our first scholarship, the Matty Fund Scholarship. And recently he reconnected with the Matty Fund. And I know Nicole was really excited to reconnect with him. He sent us a Christmas card. That was it, right? And he was the first recipient. And right away we started talking with him again. So it's a pleasure to have him here today also to share his experience. This is Tom.
Well, hello. So my story is a little different than Megan's. I started having seizures when I was about 3.5 years old. I actually remember the first one better than I remember any of the other ones. The very first one, I was watching my mom cook breakfast, leaning on the back of a chair, and luckily I have two parents that are both nurses. They knew what was happening. I didn't know what was happening. But that was my first grand mal seizure. And from about 3.5 years old till the middle of 8th grade, I had grand mal seizures on and off. Most of the time it was when I was being weaned off medications, usually when I had something going on with my neck or throat. Most of the time, the two biggest ones that my mom ever told me about were when I had strep throat and I was being weaned off medication, trying to get me off, and I would have a seizure and go right back on medication. When I was in high school, like Megan, prior to high school, middle school, my family and I made the decision to stay on medication while I made it through big life points like getting a driver's license. I didn't want to miss out on getting my driver's license. I was big into sports. Football was my biggest sport, as you can probably tell from my size. So I was going to a lot of football camps because I was too big to play Pop Warner football. So my family being nurses, and I decided with my doctors that to stay on my medication as I began these big life moments of being away from home for the first time, because all of my seizures did happen. Luckily, it never happened at school or anywhere out in public. It was usually when I was homesick or when I was sleeping. It would happen in the middle of the night. So I was never in the stigma category. My close friends, my teammates, always knew what was, I would always talk to them. I never had a problem telling anyone, and they never had a problem learning about it. If they did, I really didn't care if they did anyways. As I was saying, I had seizures till about the 8th grade where I had a cluster of seizures in one day, and that was the first time my mom administered Diastat to me, and that's when we decided to stay on medication. I stayed on medication, different anti-seizure medications until after my freshman year in college. Like Marisol said, I was the first recipient for the Matty Fund Scholarship. I used it to go to URI. I played football for 5 years I was at URI. And that was the kind of the big thing that helped me in college, where you would expect teens to have pressures of parties and why aren't you doing this, why aren't you doing that. I had the luxury of having teammates that I was close with, and being in a college sport, you lived with them, you knew them close, so I trusted them to explain that I had seizures. Luckily I hadn't had one since the 8th grade, so the guys that lived with me knew where my Diastat was, what to do if I had a seizure, when to help me out, when to just sit there with me until it was all over. Luckily it never happened. So I lived a pretty normal life. Never had to deal with the stigma of it. Everyone accepted it. As Megan said, my friends were there to defend me. If we went out in the college life, I didn't go out as much as everyone else because I chose to work to keep myself out of that aspect, but I did work in the nightclub life, so they all knew about my seizures that I worked with because I only worked with people that I was close with. As you can tell, I do work on a fire department now, so I'm one of those jobs that people think you can't do it. I'm a dispatcher an emergency dispatcher for the town of Smithfield, and I've been a volunteer firefighter since the age of 16 and an EMT. And my dad has been my lieutenant on the engine that I've been on for just as long. So my parents have always been the big supporters of me. My mom is here today. My dad had to teach. They've always been my big supporters, and as nurses, when someone's ever had a question, I've said, go talk to my mom, she'll tell you what to do. And when it came to sports, they've always been big supporters of myself and my sisters, so they were always there, so there was never that concern of, if something happens, what do we do? It was always, well, Mrs. Estrella or Mr. Estrella are there, they'll take care of it. And they turned into, my mom is the high school nurse, so Mount Hope is one of the my mom works at Mount Hope. She takes care of all the students there, and that's why a lot of the teachers there, if you ever go to Mount Hope, are very educated, because she makes sure, and I was one of her first to pass on to people so they weren't scared of epilepsy. She deals with diabetes, anything you can think of. She doesn't want the stigma to get ahead of the students, and that's what helped me not have to deal with the stigma of epilepsy, because I was open with it and I had parents that stood behind me. So that's kind of my story and sticking to it. Thank you.